Everyone's talking about nervous system regulation like it's some type of new discovery. It's not. The yogis mapped this terrain thousands of years ago. We just forgot how to read the map. Modern science is catching up, but most people use yoga for the wrong job. It wasn't designed to make you calm. It was built to train your nervous system to be able to regulate under pressure. My name is Ryan Suave, and I'm a trauma and addiction therapist with over 10,000 hours of clinical experience. This video gives you the original blueprint, straight from the yogis who trained for the inner war. So you stop chasing calm and start building capacity just like they did. It might seem like you're facing a dozen problems all at the same time, but what if those struggles aren't separate? What if they all stem from the same place? I am convinced that one of our chief problems as human beings is that we confuse discomfort with threat and then react to discomfort as if it's something that's threatening. That we go into survival mode when survival mode is not called for. And we don't want to lose survival mode when there are times that we're actually at threat, where we may be in physical danger or even the danger of death, that we want to automatically and unconsciously go into fight or flee so that we can get out of the situation and survive. It's as simple as that. The problem happens when we go into these survival patterns when survival is not called for. They're actually appropriate reactions at an inappropriate time. Appropriate because if there was something that was life-threatening or physically threatening, we would want these patterns to go into action. Inappropriate time because that's not what the time is called for. That emotional discomfort is not an actual threat, even when it feels like that. We understand that it can feel like that based on the shapings from early on in childhood or in the formative years when things like abandonment or neglect or abuse could actually be life-threatening, that we needed our immediate caregivers and those around us to be able to protect us. As a baby, our caregivers are like gods. We can't take care of ourselves, we can't feed ourselves, we can't protect ourselves, we can't even move around. If they're not there for us, it equals death or can equal death. As we grow, that changes. And if there were patterns of abuse or neglect or experiences that shaped a person so that they felt like they were in danger all the time, and those aren't resolved, they can left being adults where this similar feelings or experiences come in, like abandonment in a relationship or somebody leaves them. As an adult, abandonment cannot kill you. It might feel like it's going to. The loss of a relationship can feel like death, but it doesn't equal death. They might not be sensing that they're going to die, but if you're saying, I'm not going to be okay, or I can't get through this, that's in a similar vein. That thread leads to the fear of death. And when we go into these patterns, when they're not called for, it actually creates more problems in our lives. Challenges in relationships, challenges with how we think and feel about ourselves. So many of our issues as human beings, mental health issues, can stem from this. It may not create some of the mental health issues that people have, but it absolutely exacerbates it. And this is where the yogis come in. They very well may have been some of the earliest neuroscientists. And I'm talking about yoga today, and this is true in other traditions. And I'm talking about it not necessarily as a religion and not necessarily as a spiritual path, but as a science. And we're going to dive into a little bit of one of the ancient texts called the Yogis Sutras, written by Patanjali. And he really defined the problem as our inability to see our true selves, that we had a misalignment of our mind, body, and spirit that did not allow us to see who we were and how the world is clearly. In one translation, the Yoga Sutra starts off as saying, the time for yoga is now. And yoga meant union. So the time for union is now. And if the time for union is now, that means that there must be a state of disunion present. You wouldn't need to move to union if there wasn't disunion. In this case, disunion of mind, body, and spirit. And he went on to say that the purpose of yoga was to still the modifications of the mind. And he argues that these modifications of our mind, these cognitions, are what get in the way of us seeing our true selves, to abiding in our true nature. And he describes 5 modifications: right thinking, wrong thinking, imagination, memory, and sleep. Right thinking, the things that we are aware of and that we know. Wrong thinking, the things we're not aware of and the things that we don't know or we misperceive. Imagination, all of the stuff that we're making up. and memory, everything from our history that creates the current lens that we have and how we see the world. It's basically our programming. And sleep, because it is a cognition, it's just a cognition of nothingness. It does still our mind, but it doesn't still it completely. We still have awareness in sleep. If we didn't have awareness in sleep, we wouldn't wake up thinking I didn't sleep well or remembering a dream that we had. That we have this awareness in sleep. We'll talk about practices where we can actually use sleep in a way that can support us in stilling the mind so that we can see our true selves. But when we talk about the first 4 modifications, we look at right thinking, wrong thinking. I really see that as like our ego development, the way that we see the world. And our imagination, we're making up so much of what we see. We are the ones that bring meaning to everything in our lives. And we know this because an event will happen and let's say a world leader dies and 50% of the world is saddened and 50% of the world is excited. Each person is bringing their meaning to that. The event itself is neutral and we bring the meaning. The solution to this isn't to stop bringing meaning. We want to bring meaning to our lives and the experiences we have. What makes us experience love and connection and joy. But we want to be able to move that meaning from something that we're making consciously and out of something that's being made for us unconsciously by our history, by our experiences, by our pre-programming. And we want to keep imagination as well because it's what allows us to be creative. It's what allows us to invent not only the things in the world, but invent new ways of being, for ourselves and for those in our lives. And we don't want to get rid of memory. Memory can be one of our greatest assets. But when it's driving us unconsciously and a modification that gets in the way, as Patanjali is talking, or blocks us from seeing our true nature, what he's talking about here is really, what we see in modern psychology. Anxiety actually comes from our imagination. There may be real events that are driving it, but we're predicting how things are going to work out in a future state and then worrying about it now. And depression really comes from our memory. From our history. It's like we experience something and we're in a state that we're going to stay in. And knowing this doesn't make us get out of anxiety and depression, but it can be something that can help us understand contextually where it's coming from so that we can work with it. Often what he described in the sutras as emptiness or bliss is misinterpreted. That the bumper sticker version of bliss is that we're going to be happy all the time. And really what he's talking about is non-attachment, that I'm not going to be so connected to an outcome or an experience that I need it to be a certain way in order for me to be okay. That I can reach a state of neutrality where I can bring the meaning. I can use my history. We can even use sleep in a way that will help us expand our consciousness, our awareness, and even grow. So the practice of yoga and meditation wasn't about escaping thought. It wasn't about eliminating thought. It was really building ourselves in a way that we have the capacity to be able to experience whatever thought, to be able to lean into discomfort. I've shared that I've been in recovery a long time, recovering from alcoholism and drug addiction. I used to think that I needed to be in a place that I never thought about alcohol, and I rarely do. I mostly think about it when I'm talking about it or being interviewed about alcoholism or talking with my friends in recovery. But I decided a long time ago that I wanted to organize my life in a way that if I woke up tomorrow and I was obsessing over a drink, that I could still be okay, that I didn't have to engage in the behavior. That translates for me and in my work with others. We can stop fighting anything and everything. We can make space for it. As the yogis would say, abide in our true nature and sit in the seat of self and be the experiencer, be the witness of life. That I can have thoughts come in, I can have emotions come in and fully experience them and then choose, be able to respond in what I do with them, rather than let them choose for me and let them drive the boat. So the point of this is that thousands of years ago, they were already tracking some of the same loops of thought and unconscious patterns that we see in modern day psychology and personal development. Why is it important to understand that this is not a new problem? Because we don't necessarily need a new type of solution, some magic pill or some magic protocol. These are things that have been contemplated since the beginning of time. It's not quite the beginning of time, but even in the 1200s, Pascal, the mathematician, said something like, man's problem stems mostly from his inability to sit in a room in silence alone. This was long before smartphones or social media or doom scrolling. They might be amplified now, but these were problems that people have been dealing with. And they were more problems of a spiritual nature than of simply mindset or physiology, that there's a component of both of those, but it also is an impact on the spirit that drives us and animates us. In the past few years, breath work has exploded into popularity. There's courses and workshops and apps, and many of them are great. And this is not a slight against them. But breath work is not a new concept either. In fact, one could argue that breath work is the oldest concept, because with the first human coming into life, there was an inhale. The first thing every baby does is inhale. And pretty much the last thing we do in our lives is exhale. And all of the experiences in between that birth and death involve a series of inhales and exhales. It's the one thing that we cannot go very long without. And it's constant in the backdrop of our lives. We breathe. A lot of the breath work that we'll see out there now, the protocols, are designed to bring consciousness and awareness to our breath. Our breath is generally an unconscious process. It's driven by our autonomic nervous system. It's happening all day, every day in the background. We don't have to remember to do it, which is good for me, because if I had to remember to breathe, I would probably die pretty quickly in the day, because I forget my keys 3 times before I leave the house. That there are different protocols that bring consciousness to breath, and they can help us do things like upregulate, bring energy and focus, or downregulate, bring relaxation, calm, capacity. And really what these are activations of the different parts of our autonomic nervous system. 2 chief parts being the sympathetic nervous system, which really regulates fight or flight, very simply put, and the parasympathetic nervous system, which regulates rest and digest, also very simply put. When we need energy, we're engaged in the sympathetic nervous system, and when we need relaxation, it's the parasympathetic nervous system. And these aren't things that are either online or offline. We're really going between the two all day. You can even think of an inhale as activation of the sympathetic and an exhale as activation of the parasympathetic. And what I really want you to grab onto here is that both of them are activation. When we're activated in a state, like say the sympathetic nervous system, and we're in a fight or flight response, say we're in a panic or anxiety, that the way to move through that is not to just deactivate the sympathetic nervous system, to relax. Maybe you've said to somebody at some point in your life who was kind of being very intense, you told them to relax, or maybe you were being very intense and somebody told you to relax. I think you'll see that often does not create the sense of relaxation. In fact, many times it does the opposite. And that's because it's not about deactivating the sympathetic nervous system. In that sympathetic arousal, it's about activating the part of the nervous system that brings us back into relaxation and calm and capacity. I've also experienced with the clients that I've worked with over the years that when we're in a survival state or an activation of the sympathetic nervous system in fight or flight, there tends to be more oxygen being brought in, right? The body's mobilizing for threat and getting ready. Generally, people aren't breathing in a very calm and controlled way when that's happening. And I think, something has sent a signal to the nervous system that says we're not safe, whatever that is, whether it's actual or perceived. In this case, we're going to talk about perceived, and the body starts mobilizing for threat. When in those moments when we can cognitively see that there's not actual danger there, then we can consciously activate the parasympathetic nervous system. In those moments, if we can take a slow inhale and a long, slow exhale and repeat this, I believe that sends another signal to the brain and nervous system that says, well, if I can be doing this, there might not actually be a threat. Because sometimes we can cognitively know that there's not a threat, but the body is still reacting in a way as if it was, and we want to bring those into alignment. And that's what these early neuroscientists, the yogis, were training for. I'm not going to get into all of the components of yoga, but the one that most people know are the postures, the positions, or the asanas that people do when they go to a yoga class. They get on a mat and they move into positions and they'll bend their body in a certain way. And if it's a good instructor, they're going to get you to a place of like this feeling of discomfort. They call it your edge, and have you stay there, not go beyond it, not push past it to where you're going to injure yourself, but right to that edge and then just stay there. And then eventually relax back from that. And maybe they'll repeat that. But as over time, as you repeat it, they go back into it. They might be able to go a little bit further, because going to that edge and then relaxing back begins to build capacity. It begins to build flexibility in the body. And what we see is it also begins to build this flexibility in our nervous system. We're able to handle things better. And it's not just about physical exercise. It's actually about being able to have that range of motion in the nervous system, to be able to be present and at the edge of discomfort and leaning into discomfort and then relaxing back. We see that most people that lift weights understand that you're pushing into the resistance. And maybe in there's fibers that are being torn. I'm not the exercise physiologist, but I know enough to know that when you relax back and in the time and rest is when the muscle really builds. And so it's about leaning in, pushing into that resistance, and then coming back. And these postures were designed to box the body in, just like they're boxed in on the mat, in a way that it's not just going to that edge of discomfort. It's that when at that edge of discomfort, the mind's going, I can't do this. This is too far. It hurts. I need to get out of it. That's what builds that capacity in our mind, in our body, and therefore our nervous system to be able to be with discomfort. This training on the mat and in these positions was meant to be then used off the mat and in the world and in relationships. Aside from this, is many have the viewpoint that all of those postures in a yoga class are actually designed to get the body to prepare for meditation, to be able to push into all of that mental chatter, to bring up all of those modifications that Patanjali talked about, and then go into that meditative state at the end they call Shavasana, or the corpse pose, where you can completely relax, like an actual relaxation, not just finding calm for a few moments, but being able to have an embodied experience of that alignment of mind, body, and spirit. The more that we practice discomfort, that when it comes, we're able to handle it. In fact, there's a study that was done that showed that they took these regular practitioners of yoga and then a control group, and the regular practitioners were able to handle like 2 times the discomfort or pain as the control group. We do know that much of our inability to stay with something, whether it's physical activity or emotional discomfort, has to do with how we're thinking about it in those moments. And again, it's not just mindset, but that plays a role, that I feel like I can't handle it anymore. When we say I can't handle it, that sends a message that I gotta get out of it, because I can't handle it is like I'm not okay, and I'm not okay is like I'm going to die. Again, people might be thinking in these emotionally uncomfortable situations that I'm going to die, but we're sending a message to our part of our body that doesn't think in terms other than life or death, that we're not okay. And therefore we must go into survival mode. The body's not having a conversation like that. I'm bringing the words to it, but this is basically what's happening as we experience life. They didn't run from discomfort. They leaned into it, because that's where you become bulletproof, fireproof, that we can handle the difficulties in life and stay with it. That doesn't mean that we then don't take action on things. But I talk to enough people that do this, and I do it myself. I get more in trouble saying the right thing at the wrong time or in the wrong way, that I'm in reaction trying to solve some problem. And usually I'm trying to change how the other person or other people are being, versus really seeing the true nature of myself, leaning back into it, and then being able to make the conscious decision of what I do with it, rather than having those decisions made for me by some emotional or physical state that I don't feel is comfortable. The yogic path might look like it's spiritual or symbolic on the surface, but there was a science to it. And we see these reflections in modern science. The yogis, they didn't use the term brain plasticity, but they saw that through practice, we could change our patterns, that we could change our brain. And it wasn't really until the latter part of the 20th century that science fully accepted that after we had grown into adults, that our brain could change, that there was brain plasticity was possible. And the work over the last years since that in neuroscience has often been around trying to find those certain states under which the brain becomes in a state of plasticity to be able to create that. It's not easy, but the yogis showed that it could happen through disciplined practice. We do see that the brain is very plastic under an acute trauma, that an acute traumatic event can change the way that somebody sees the world, themselves, in an instant. It throws the body, mind, and spirit into a almost fixed state of survival, and they start seeing threat everywhere. We know that it happens under that state. To create it consciously, it's not as quick. There's not as an acute event that can teach us a new language or have us see ourselves or to see our true nature. But through these disciplined practices over time, we can bring that brain plasticity about. I really see that the yogis kind of built a full training system: awareness, breath, focus, presence, and integration through the body, all designed to help you see and abide in your true nature and alter your response to life. And again, there are other traditions, practices, even religions that speak to the same thing. I encourage you to find whatever speaks to you and practice. Awareness does not bring about transformation itself. Awareness is a wide open door, and it's the first step. But after awareness, we do have to practice. We know that we have to practice for things to train physically. So I encourage to train for anything physically, a marathon, for strength, for fitness. Why not train our nervous system? Why not train our emotions? Why not train our mind so that we can garner some control over it and therefore become the author of our lives? That we can move from plagiarizing from our past to writing the next chapter of our life. If learning to breathe through stress was a wake-up call, what if the way that you're handling your emotions is actually hijacking your healing? Watch this next video to see why insight alone isn't enough and how to finally stop repeating unhelpful patterns. If anything in here helped you, please subscribe, share with your friends. My mission continues to be to provide no-cost tools and education to help people be better versions of themselves. I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.